Good morning. My name is Josh Evans, Vice President of Government Relations for IARF. It's Friday, May 15th, and we are here with our IARF weekend session. I'm going to skip right to it. This week we were pleased to have the opportunity to sit down with State Senator Daniel Biss from the 9th District. Took a different approach this week. Folks will recall last week we sat down with State Representative Ron Sandak to talk about Governor Rauner's turnaround agenda and where that fits in with the overall FY16 budget negotiations. We took the same route with Senator Daniel Biss this time to get a bit of a contrast, we believe, and you'll note from some of the comments that Representative Sandak made. So, a bit of a lengthy interview this time, so we want to maximize the time for you guys to take a look and listen into the well-articulated comments from State Senator Daniel Biss. So, we're excited to be here this week with State Senator Daniel Biss from the 9th District.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Chairman of the Human Services Committee this year, as well as a member of the Appropriations Committee, meaning that you are involved in all fun discussions on substantive matter issues that affect community DD and mental health services, as well as budgetary matters that affect community DD services. So certainly glad we're able to do this. Last week, Senator, we talked with a former colleague of yours, now State Representative Ron Sandak, about the governor's turnaround agenda. From the standpoint of what, in his opinion, do elements of that turnaround agenda, how do they intersect with ongoing discussions here in the middle of May on the FY16 budget? Got his standpoint on the elements of the importance of that turnaround agenda, say to community service providers. Interested in your thoughts on the governor's turnaround agenda, what that might mean for not-for-profit service providers and the state budget.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for the question. The governor's turnaround package is sitting in the middle of all the discussions in Springfield. In fact, literally, as we are talking right now, the House is debating one component of that package, namely the right-to-work proposal that the governor has. I find this a little baffling. The state is in a serious fiscal hole. There's huge pension debt. There's a projected roughly $6 billion budget deficit for fiscal year 16, the fiscal year starting this coming July 1st. Revenues have dropped, needs are significant, and those problems are big and they're serious and they require a lot of attention. The governor's turnaround agenda is really about a whole bunch of other stuff, and I would argue a whole bunch of unrelated stuff. There's a lot that is directed specifically at working people, at labor unions, and the middle class. So for instance, this right-to-work proposal is being debated right now. That is a hot topic in other states, I recognize it. Wisconsin passed it very recently, Indiana and Michigan not too long before. But A, it's not a proposal to address the state's fiscal issues. It would not increase revenues, it would not cut spending, it would not decrease debt. It is, on the other hand, a very, very serious fight on a very deep ideological question, which is how do you over time want to grow an economy? Illinois has average household income that's around $5,000 annually greater than our neighboring states. And I think that's a good thing. I think it makes us an attractive place, that we have higher paying jobs and more prosperous families. The governor apparently feels differently, and apparently feels that policies that decrease the power of workers to negotiate for better working conditions and higher wages are the right way to go. If we were to enact right to work, we would see wages drop over time, maybe bring us more in line with neighboring states in terms of having low wages, maybe eventually surpass them and have lower wages, maybe then be more attractive to bottom-feeding corporations that are looking for the state where they can find the lowest paid employees in the country. And if our goal is to grow the economy by growing the number of the lowest possible paid jobs out there, right to work is the way to go. But if instead we want to grow the economy by having a thriving middle class that has money in their pocket they're able to spend in the local economy, help support local businesses, that's not the way to go. And more importantly, if you believe that having a thriving middle class is a crucial social goal, then this is a step in the wrong direction. Why am I saying all this? Because you and I are here to talk in part about services for vulnerable populations. I think it is foolish to pretend that we can view those vulnerabilities in the form of addictions, mental illness, other disabilities, as divorced from a broader economic set of circumstances. And if you create a economic playing field that will increase the odds of poverty, increase the extent of poverty, you will also, unfortunately, grow the vulnerable population and create more and more and more pressure on our service providers, who are already, as you well know, under-supported, underpaid, and overworked by the state of Illinois. So this is one of a large list of examples of policy ideas that's, some people like it. As you can tell, I think it's a very, very, very bad idea, but it's a big economic transformation about who has power and who will be paid what, without really taking on the budget challenge. And I would argue over time, exacerbating the budget challenge, A, by shrinking the middle class and therefore impairing economic growth, and B, by increasing the population living in poverty and therefore increasing the needs that people will have of our social safety net.
Senator, a couple of other elements of the turnaround agenda that have been discussed, and at least I've picked up and are perceived that maybe it's just made up in the cloud, sort of conversational, but that there are elements of the turnaround agenda that is believed need to be legislated or adopted before the governor could support a revenue discussion, or before he would get on board and negotiate on additional revenue. Say, for example, workers' compensation reform, some changes to unemployment insurance. Not quite the same dynamics as right to work as we discussed. What are your thoughts on that discussion, that perhaps some of these things like workers' comp and unemployment insurance need to be tied to a revenue discussion? Is that suitable? Are there areas to negotiate there, do you think?
Well, everything has to be an area to negotiate. We have an obligation to work together, and we have separation of powers for a reason, and the governor's point of view needs to be listened to and engaged with. I find it bizarre, though, that he wants to tie everything together in one giant deal. I don't know why that's necessary or helpful, but you're absolutely right that seems to be his preference. And so I think his attitude is that by delaying real negotiation about the budget until he's gotten a lot of what he wants in his turnaround agenda, he's somehow giving himself leverage. And look, I get it, negotiations are all about leverage, but I feel like I come here just to solve problems, and I'll solve any problem that we can reach agreement on today and then move on to the next one tomorrow. And I wish that as we sit here, you and me, filming this on May 14th, 17 days before the end of the month, when hopefully a budget will be passed, I wish we could just negotiate rather than negotiate about whether or not we're going to negotiate later. And that
well said.
slow dance is maybe something that we should move past now.
Shifting more directly onto the fiscal 16 budget, it's certainly at this juncture no surprise to you that the association is opposed to many elements of the governor's proposed budget. Over $80 million taking out of community mental health services at a time, arguably, where there is as much exposure about the need for mental health care in Illinois and the United States as has ever been.
Exactly.
In addition, further reductions to some very important grants to community developmental disability services at a time where the state of Illinois must comply with consent decrees in that area. It should also know that IARF and over 60 of our member organizations have approved board resolutions supporting revenues so long as portions of those revenues are invested in the community. What is your take on the proposed budget? Where do you think that the budget is going to go from your perspective as a member, not only your opinion, but also as a member of the Senate Democratic Caucus? And do you think that revenue is something that will be put up on the board before the end of May for a serious up or down vote?
The governor's introduced budget for fiscal year 2016 is very cool. It includes extremely deep cuts in human services and Medicaid, as you obviously know well. And it's worth saying that it includes deep cuts elsewhere in the budget too. Public four-year institutions of higher education are cut 31.5%. Aid to municipalities, who are themselves really struggling, is cut in half. Aid to transit agencies. And so what it seems that the budget does is it says, hey, the tax rate dropped massively on January 1, so here we are with this more constrained revenue environment. We're going to try to balance the budget, and we're going to do it in three ways. One is imaginary stuff. So $2.2 billion in pension savings that we'll definitely not see under any circumstances in the coming fiscal year. That's an imaginary made-up number that it would be deeply fiscally irresponsible to pretend was there when we make our budget. Then another category is cuts that harm the most vulnerable in our society, and there are many of those, as you well know, and they would be in some cases really devastating to people who the state has a moral and frankly in some cases legal obligation to support. And the last is shift of cost elsewhere, right? When you slash aid to public higher education institutions, there's another name for that, that's a tuition increase. When you cut aid to local governments, that's a property tax increase. When you cut aid to a transit agency, that's a fare hike. And so you have these three things, there's some imaginary stuff, there's some deep cuts to the most vulnerable, and there's shifts of cost to other entities. And I think the governor knows that that's a really problematic set of options. And so what we need to do is to, certainly taking that as a starting point, then have a real negotiation about what our true needs are as a society. And we've needed for a long time to have an honest discussion about how to fix our tax code, how to have a fair tax code, one that taxes based on the ability to pay, one that brings in adequate revenue to produce the level of service provision that the people of Illinois need and deserve and demand, one that's economically sound and efficient. And we ought to, I think, be having a really comprehensive debate about our tax code, and that debate needs to go hand in hand with the budgetary debate. If you separate them out, you're inevitably having a discussion that doesn't really, that's incomplete, that you're essentially analyzing something in a vacuum where it needs to be discussed in the context of its partner. Now, you asked, do I think we'll have a vote on a tax reform package or some kind of revenue bill before the end of May? I honestly have no idea. I'm going to go to the pawn shop and sell my crystal ball because it's not doing much for me right now. It's just very hard for me to read the situation, and I don't know. But if we want to do right by the people of Illinois, comprehensive tax reform that focuses on fairness for working families and adequacy of revenue to have a humane budget needs to be part of the equation.
So, Senator Biss, thank you for your time. And to wrap up, I would close by saying, in recognition of May being Mental Health Awareness Month, IARF wants to thank you for your filing today of Senate Resolution 547, a acknowledgement of a national effort to increase awareness of mental health awareness. So thank you for that. Thank you for the time today, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to talk with you.